Welcome everyone to our monthly NOSA webinar. I'm just so glad that you could join us. And for those of you who aren't here live, you'll be able to see this in the recording. But Connie and I, as we were discussing topics for this year, we really thought that this was an important one to cover. And especially after, a lot of the devastation that came as a result of the pandemic. I've noticed a lot of strain on families, a lot of added stress when it comes to finances. And, a lot of people aren't coping well. And so I really felt like we need to address this and to bring some perspective to it and hopefully some strategies that you can use in your day-to-day journey that will help relieve some of the stress and put a new perspective and some strategies in your toolbox to overcome financial overwhelm. So before we jump in, I just wanted us to take a moment and take a breath, because I know that this topic, carries a lot for us as individuals and also as a community. I know that I've had incredible financial strain in my life, actually for my whole life. And so this is a topic that I personally can identify with. And so sometimes when talking about finances and talking about, issues related to money, even that topic can create anxiety in us and can cause stress. And so just before we even start, I just want us to posture our hearts, take a deep breath, breathe in, breathe out, let go of all your preconceived notions or your ideas of, what this webinar might be about. And, if you are carrying any significant financial stresses, I just encourage you that, just hand them over to the Lord. Cast your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. And I believe that by the end of this webinar, you're going to have a different perspective. You might even walk away with some excitement and definitely some hope when it comes to your financial situation, or at least that's my hope for you. Sometimes in our life, our finances get rocked, and it's in ways that, we aren't prepared for. It's in ways that we don't expect. It's in ways that, we could have never anticipated. And some of these things I've listed here, they're all things that I've actually experienced myself. There's the loss of a job or income. I remember during the recession how Doug and my income literally dropped by half overnight. And within a few weeks of the recession hitting, we had all of our leasing companies calling in our loans, and we had 10 days to sell off our equipment, right? That's pretty stressful. We've also had car repairs or needing replacements. Literally, even in just the last 2 weeks, those of you who know my story, we literally had every vehicle go down in the same 2 weeks. And for a week and a half, I wasn't even able to leave my property without my beloved sister Connie coming to my rescue to drive me around Calgary to do egg deliveries. So I get it. I understand the stress that comes with financial struggles. Another one is home repairs. This has came to our door so many times, whether it's an appliance that stops working or, plumbing that fails. I currently have these issues, right? And I remember, my oven stopped working one winter, and it was a lean time for us. We didn't have the finances to replace it. And the only setting that it worked on was 200 degrees. So literally, if I had to make anything, I would start the day before and I would cook it on 200 degrees for like 18 hours, and it would be finally cooked for dinner the next day. So I understand the trials that come with needing home repairs. Also, leaky roofs, right? Like you can name them. I'm sure they've happened to you or someone that you know. Another area would be deaths in the family. When there's a death, there's a lot of costs that are associated with handling those issues, whether it's an estate issue, funeral fees. These are all things that we don't prepare for. We don't anticipate. We go through life and we just, we don't always prepare for those things, and so when they happen, it is quite a shock. Another area that we can face difficulty or strain is medical bills, dental bills. I know each time I take my family to the dentist, it's at like $1,000 to $1,500 bill, and that's just for cleanings and x-rays. Imagine if you had to get root canals or any other major work done, or, you had to pay for an out of, a medical service that's not provided under our healthcare. Those are all things that shock us financially. Another one is when we choose to finance things. A lot of times when we think, oh, well, I need this or I want this. And especially like for me, when all of our cars went down, the question is, what do I do? Is it time for us to finance another vehicle, right? And we had to consider that really strongly. And it was like, no, we can't do that. We can't take on any more financial strain or any debt. And so we had to come up with some other solutions. Another one, natural disasters or accidents. This one has also touched us. I remember when we had our barn fire, overnight, we lost our entire barn, we lost most of our animals, and we lost all of our landscaping plants that we had been growing in the greenhouse that we had built around this structure. And so, like, literally overnight, we lost so much. And in that situation, I'm thankful that the winds didn't take our home as well, but, we were starting over from scratch. There's the shock of financial stress that comes when your family grows. And I know that the more children you have, that shock is a little bit less because you have hand-me-downs, or you have, you can pass some of the things on to the next children. But, with more mouths to feed, there's more money required. Now you got extra car seats, you got extra strollers. I get that. I mean, we had 4 children under the age of 6, or no, under the age of 8, I think. I'm losing track. They're too old now. They're almost all adults. But the point is, these are all expenses we don't always prepare for. We don't always think of it in advance, and it causes us strain. It causes stress on our lives. Another one is marriage. The cost of getting married and the costs associated with, what comes after marriage. And another issue in marriage is also when you and your spouse don't agree on spending habits. That's a huge stressor, and that's one that me and my husband have faced as well. Another one could be starting up a new business. That takes a lot of capital, that takes a lot of risk, that takes a lot of time, that can cause a lot of stress. And also with divorce or separations, you don't always understand that, even with going through a divorce, now you have 2 households to support. You have children that need, you know, supplies in both locations. Like, there's so much added costs and stress and strain that come with some of these things that, we don't always see coming. We don't always prepare for. I also wanted to bring up, when we face insecurity in our finances, when we face situations that cause us, you know, to have this extra strain, what are some of the concerns that we could have? What are some of the things, some of the areas where it can cause us to, feel lack or feel that extra pressure? And the first area is food insecurity. I know so many families that face this on a regular basis. They don't have enough income coming in, and they sometimes worry about where their next meal's coming from. And I know as Connie and I were growing up, we had this fear a lot. And it wasn't a fear that we wouldn't ever eat, but it was always that, in the back of our mind, would we have to go to the food bank? Or I remember there were some times where me and my dad, we would just go driving around and we had to pick bottles off the side of the street so we could, put groceries on the table. So this is a real issue. And it's a real thing that impacts us when we don't have our finances under control. Another one is a lack of medical care. In some of our most difficult times, I wasn't even able to get my children regular dental work or get some of those extra needed medical things that we've needed as a family. And so that's disheartening. That's hard to handle when you face those kind of struggles. This other one is one that I know very well. When I actually met my husband, he was in a significant amount of debt, and it was due to a business partnership that had gone south, and he was left holding the bag. And at that point, I decided, I'm going to help shoulder this debt. But, we've been now married for almost 22 years, and we've been slowly paying down this debt. But I can tell you, it comes with a lot of stress, a lot of strain, a lot of balancing, right? And it's not a fun place to be in. And so I discourage debt. And I hope as we continue in this, you'll see the reasons why. You might also face, having a vehicle repossessed or maybe some other items that you're financing. If you can't keep up with your payments, those things will be removed from you. Homelessness is another concern. Most of us, not most of us, but a good percentage of us live paycheck to paycheck, right? And, what happens if we lose that job, right? There is that concern that if we get behind in our payments, that we might not have a place to live. And I know that this is another thing that Connie and I faced a lot as children. Our dad had a seasonal job, and every winter he was out of work. And usually by, February, March, my parents were 3 months behind in our rent, and we were getting eviction notices. So we moved almost every year or every 2 years because of non-payment, and it was just something that we grew up. It was something that I knew very well. Another area could be a concern of needing to go bankrupt. And, you know, that's not an easy one. Thankfully, I have never had to experience that, but I know many people who have, and I know it's not an easy road to go down. Another concern might be not having a vehicle or transportation. And like I mentioned, a lot of people right now are living paycheck to paycheck. And so when we spend more than what we're earning, that's a problem, right? Because then we don't have enough. We're not putting anything towards the future. We're not putting anything towards those extra surprise expenses. And that's something that we should be concerned about. Another area is we might not be able to pay for our basic needs. That comes down to, food, clothing, shelter, medical care. Those are all basic needs. And so when we have lack, that is sometimes an area where we have struggle. Another concern, and this one might not seem like a concern, but sometimes if we have unhealthy spending habits, we can accumulate a lot of stuff. And in that, we start to feel overwhelmed. And, we just kind of get stuck. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to get out of that cycle. And so that could also be a concern. And another one that I've heard of recently by quite a few people is they're afraid of not being able to retire, that they will literally be working to the day that they pass away, which, that's a sad reality for many of us where we are right now. Debt can cause stress that is linked to health issues such as cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, stomach disorders, sleep disorders, anxiety or anger, or even reduced performance at work or school, and definitely relationship problems. And I can speak, very personally about this. A lot of my stress, I've gone through chronic stress for 30 years of my life, and it caused a lot of issues in my body. It caused a lot of issues in my health and in my relationships. And so I can't stress this enough, how damaging debt is in our life and what how it just causes so many barriers to us to experience freedom. And so, if nothing else out of this entire webinar, if you can just understand the need and the urgency in focusing and getting out of debt, that is the great place to start. So the first step of moving forward and finding freedom when it comes to financial overwhelm and stress is to actually come to an understanding about, well, what do you actually think about money? What are some of your mindsets? And some of them might be positive. You might actually have a good grip on your financial state. You might have good financial habits. Um, you might not have had a lot of these struggles that I've already talked about. But for the majority of people that I've talked to, they are experiencing a considerable amount of stress. And so we need to be honest with ourselves, and we need to look at the deeper underlying reasons to why we make some of the decisions that we do, and what are some of those destructive mindsets. So the first mindset I want to address is, sometimes we actually have adequate resources in our life, but the problem is that we have our priorities wrong. We prioritize feeding our desires or our wants before fulfilling our needs or paying our bills. And what I found is these are often linked to lies or wounds in our life. You know, for example, let's say as a child, you never had any, you know, extras in your life. Things were lean, things were tight, and if you wanted something, you were never allowed to have it. So here in your adulthood, you might have this sense, well, if I want it, if I desire it, then I'm just going to go do it. And you'll put that first before you put your responsibilities first. And so, like I said at the beginning of this, in order for us to really truly examine how we're making our decisions and where these patterns and these behaviors are coming from, we have to be honest with ourselves. So the first question I want you to ask yourself is, what are you spending your money on? And when answering this question, it might require you to sit down and actually go over your finances. Go through your finances and see, how much money are you spending on eating out? How much money are you spending out on entertainment? How much money does it take to actually run your household, whether it be feeding your family or paying your mortgage? All of those things, to take an honest look at what that is, and even see, am I spending more than I'm making? That's a huge thing to become aware of. And many of us don't know those numbers. Another mindset that you might struggle with is you might find it difficult to receive gifts from others. Now, this one can be rooted in not wanting to be seen as needy or not being seen as a good financial steward. And what I've found is that that's often rooted in judgment or a vow made. So, for example, if you grew up in poverty, you might be like, well, I will never be like my parents. I will never take handouts from the church, or I will never, accept, I will never go to the food bank. Like, you might make those kind of judgments or those vows, right? And so when those opportunities come, when you're in difficulty and you're in stress, and, people genuinely want to be a blessing to you, you might find it difficult to receive from them the gifts that they would like to give you. And so, honesty check. Ask this question of yourself. Why do you have difficulty receiving from others? And is it a pride issue? Is it a shame issue? Is it, you want to be looking good in front of everyone? It's just time for us to really take a serious look at what's going on inside of us and why we make the decisions that we make. Another one could be people who constantly are just giving away at the expense of providing for their own needs. This can include going into debt, and a lot of that could be people pleasing. Um, One other thing in this area could be, constantly spending on things to, maintain a certain perception in your life, or um, continually being involved in different things that give the airs of, that you're well off, or different things like that, because that is often rooted in a fear of what others will think of you. And if they knew, how difficult your financial situation would be, and you might have a fear that they will not treat you the same, they will not um, be in relationship with you in the same way. And so if you are doing that, if you are giving to others, or if you are spending frivolously like that, the question is, what is your motive? What is driving you to do those things? Um, and in any situation, I think it's good for you to ask yourself, why am I doing this? What is my motive? Is there an underlying fear? Is there an underlying root or reason why I'm doing this? Especially if it's a negative habit or a negative pattern that is causing you strain and stress in your financial life. Another area are financial addictions, which are repetitive financial decisions that put yourself in bondage. So I gave two examples here, but there's many. One example would be like a shopping addiction. And that would be if, when you start feeling down, or you start feeling stressed or overwhelmed, that your first inclination is to go to the store and buy something to help you feel better. That is a problem. That is what I would call a financial addiction. And, if that is something that you're struggling with, I would challenge you to, find out the reason why. Another one is gambling. Sometimes we get ourselves in this mess, and gambling is a true addiction. Once you get started in it, it's hard to get out. But the mindset behind that is often thinking, well, if only I could win, I can get myself out of this mess. Or, even if I just play one more time, I could win. I can win. Right. And it's like this simple deception of the enemy that, sucks us in with this mindset that we can solve these issues on our own, and that we can use something as simple as, what we call just a simple game, but it's not. It's a very serious issue that we need to take serious. So, how do we honestly pay attention to this in our life? Take a serious look at your spending habits. Take a serious look at what you're doing with your finances. Is the way that you're spending your finances hiding an unmet need, worry, or insecurity in your life? And the last one I wanted to bring up today is the mindset that I don't have enough finances to cover this need or desire that I have, so I'll just put it on a credit card, or I'll just go get financing. And this is a definite ploy of the enemy to keep us captive, to keep us in bondage. And, there is something about not giving into that spirit of like instant gratification and getting it now, um, that gives you freedom. And for many years, I had this mindset. For many years, I thought this way, right? When I would do my monthly budgets, I would think, okay, so this is how much I have in my bank account, this is how much I have coming in, and this is how much I have on my credit cards, right? So I just automatically included that in my allowable spending amounts. And that is not a good place to be in. So the honesty check here is, do you view your credit card limits within the amounts you have available to spend? Because if you do, then you're in an unhealthy spot, because that is just going to keep you in bondage. That's going to keep you in a place of continuous struggle. Because I can tell you with all honesty that those credit cards, if you miss even one payment, your percentage goes up to 29.9% interest rate. That is compounding interest. And, you know, many years ago, this was right when the recession happened, my husband and I had some credit cards. And when that recession happened, we were not able to keep up on even the minimum payments. And honestly, that compounding interest was out of control. It just kept adding every month to the point where it was just something that we couldn't manage. And so this is not a place I want to see anyone stuck in. Here's a quote by Charity Bradshaw. Debt is like a ravenous animal that demands to be fed and doesn't care if you've been have eaten or not. And literally this is what debt is like. It demands to be paid first. It demands that you deal with it first. And so a lot of times, you're making minimum payments before you're even considering paying your electricity or gas bill. And that's not a way to live. That's not a way to thrive. That's not a way to, remove that extra stress from our life. And so we need to become vigilant and get dedicated to getting rid of debt in our life. So I shared a lot of negatives when it comes to finances, but I wanted to paint a real picture about where the struggle lies and where some of those struggles come from and what are some of the mindsets and some of the, potential underlying reasons for why you might be struggling. But that's not where the story ends. And in order for you to find freedom, in order for you to step into a place of not feeling overwhelmed and being able to handle your finances in a much more manageable way, you have to acknowledge where you are and you got to acknowledge how you got there. And these are probably some of the most important questions that you're going to have to ask yourself in this process, because once you find out the why, then the solutions will be easy to implement. And because I say that because when you don't know the underlying reason, then you might be trying to put some strategies in place, but if they're not actually meeting or solving the problem that's underlying, then you're not going to find lasting success. So here's some questions I'd like you to ask yourself. And I'm going to encourage you guys to, really sit with this over the next month and take some time to process some of these questions and don't rush through this, right? Because some of these might not be easy to answer, but for you to kind of get an understanding will be incredibly important. So what was important to you that you did not have access to as a child? That could be something monetary, that could be, a basic human need, that could be even time. Maybe you didn't have access to people, your parents. Maybe they desired for you to have a life of abundance. And so maybe they worked 2 or 3 jobs, which meant they were never home. So maybe the thing that was important to you that you didn't have access to as a child was maybe your parents. Maybe they worked too much. Maybe their financial mindsets were wrong. Another question is, how are you justifying your spending because of what you didn't receive as a child? So with that example I just shared, you might take after your parents, right? You might have, taken after that intention of, providing the best for your family, making sure that they're never without, making sure they have the best opportunities. But what is that costing you? What is that doing to your, quality of life? So that's a question I want you to ask yourself. Another question could be, do you believe you can mend a wound that you feel that you have from your childhood by the things that you spend your finances on? So now this refers to more of that mindset of, when you're feeling bad about yourself or you're feeling down, that you just want to go buy something to make yourself feel better. So do you really feel that you could, fill that wound, fill that empty spot in your life by the things that you spend your money on? And that's an important question to ask yourself. Another question is, do you care about your social status? Do you need the most expensive things to feel like you have value? Another question is, what was the environment regarding finances in your home as a child? I know the environment in my home as a child was very stressful. There never seemed to be enough. There was always conflict. Um, and the conflict often ended up in like arguments and rage and fighting. And so, what was the environment in your home? Because, let's say it was the same for me, and, you saw a lot of conflict. Maybe you have developed this sense of, I don't want to talk about finances because I don't want to cause conflict. I don't want to have any issues, right? So we just kind of ignore it. We just kind of pretend it doesn't exist, right? So what was the environment like in your home as a child regarding finances, and how has that impacted you? How has that changed the way you want to respond to financial concerns? Another question you can ask is, what unhealthy mindsets do I have around money? So that can include one of the 5 that we already talked about, or it might be another mindset that will become to your attention, or one that you know about. There's many different unhealthy mindsets that revolve around money. So, to acknowledge what those are and which ones you operate in will be very important for moving forward. Another question is, how have my choices contributed to where I am today? We've all lived our lives. We've all been faced with many different choices. Some we've made were good, some we've made were bad. But whatever those decisions were, there's no condemnation in it, there's no shame, but acknowledging where we are today as a result of those, right? Maybe we, are stuck somewhere because of some of our choices. So acknowledging those and making note of those and the reason why we made those choices will be important moving forward. Another question is, am I making decisions impulsively to meet my emotional needs? Are there areas in my life that I need to reevaluate my priorities? So this one could relate to many different areas, but most specifically, you know, if you are making a specific financial decision your priority, but it's not beneficial for your financial overall goals, then that's going to need to be reevaluated. You're going to have to, reconsider whether that's something that you value, something that is worth continuing in your life if you actually want to move forward. Another thing that you might want to consider are, what are some of your dreams? Maybe they've felt stunted because of a lack of finances. Are there things that you've wanted to do in your life, achieve in your life, but you just can't because you don't have the finances to do them? And in this process, what I want you to do is to basically write your financial story or map out your roadmap. And, that's from where you started and the journey to where you are today. And, get a full picture. And then ask your question, how can I make course corrections so that I can get back on the right path? Because, even myself, I'm not necessarily where I want to be. And so I'm always making course corrections. I'm always doing some internal work of trying to, figure out where I made some unhealthy choices and where I can make some course corrections. And this one, I think, is maybe these last 2 for me are the most important. And it's the last 2 is, do I trust God with my needs, or do I depend on myself? Many of the financial issues in our lives, I believe, happen as a result of us believing that we have to handle it ourselves, that it depends completely on us. But every time I look at the scriptures, every time I read what the Bible has to say about finances, the message is the same. If we trust in God, He will provide what we need. If we put Him first, everything else will be added to us. And this is a principle that I have found to be true in my life. And I want to just share a few examples because I think it will be helpful for you guys to kind of picture what that looks like. And so the first story I want to share is I was 19 years old, and I had just finished a discipleship program at my church. And I really sensed the Holy Spirit say to me, I want you to move out. And I didn't have any work lined up. I had a tiny bit of savings, but I figured, you know what? No problem. I'll find a place, I'll move out, and then I'll get a job. So I found a place, I moved out, and within a week of me being in my new place, I felt God speak to me again, and He said, Laura, I don't want you to work. I just want you to spend your time with me. I want to download stuff to you. I want to speak to you. And He said, I will provide all of your needs. Right? So in that moment, I had a choice. I had a choice to believe what God was saying to me and trust Him, or I could believe that it all depended on myself and ignored what He said and went and found a job and worked. But I can tell you, I chose the first option, which was to trust that I was hearing from God correctly. And I still to this day don't know how, but literally, God provided all of my needs. I never went without food. I always had a bus pass. I had a cell phone. I had no job. I had no income coming in, but everything was always paid for. You know, I would have people randomly give me money, or I would have all of a sudden, you know, my bill was paid and I didn't know who paid it. Like just different random things would happen. And God always provided. And this went on for about 8 months. And after that 8 months, God spoke to me again and He said, Laura, it's time for you to go back to work. And He had told me what kind of work I would get into. And so I won't get into that whole story. But the point of this is that when we trust God with our needs, when we listen to Him and we obey what He says, then He always provides on the other end. Another story is actually a recent story from this year, or last year actually. And Doug, my husband, he has a seasonal landscape business. So in our winters, it's always quite lean. We have limited income. And so this past in 2023, you know, it was that lean time again. And we have a few monthly payments that come in from different sources. And one of those times, you know, Holy Spirit said to my husband, I want you to sow $1,000 into this other business. And when you have lack already, you don't have enough to pay your own bills, but God asks you to do something sacrificially, you have a choice. Do we obey God, or do we just, you know, put that towards what we want or what we need? And so in that moment, when Doug brought it to me, I said, well, if you believe that that was God speaking to you, then we need to do it. And so we did. We sowed $1,000 into this other business. We prayed over that business and we blessed that business and declared increase over that business. And that business was struggling. So meanwhile, we'd given the money away and we kind of forgot about it. But we always know that when you sow a seed, when you act in obedience, God always brings it back. And so, you know, shortly after that, Doug started getting his work again. And come that summer, for the first time in like 30 years, he had never not had work in the summer. Well, that last year, in the month of August, Doug had no work. That had never happened before. And so here we are, we were at a place where it was like, okay, God, you know, in our time of need, when we had nothing, you asked us to give away $1,000. And why now, in our busiest time of the year, we have no work, right? And whenever we prayed, you know, God just spoke to us. This is a divine pause, right? And so in that, we had to trust. We had to rely on God, and we had to say, okay, if this is a divine pause, then what does God want us to do in this time? And so we did the things in our heart that we felt God telling us to do, but we waited in faith. And then all of a sudden, we got a call from the gentleman that we had sowed the $1,000 into. And he said, I just got a call for this contract, which is outside of my scope of experience. And he said, would you like to partner with me on this project? So Doug took a look at it, and he quoted it and bid the job, and we got it. And so long story short, not only did he get this job, but the profit margin on this job was so significant that it was almost 10 times the amount that we sowed, or no, more than that, almost between 10 and 100%. It was a significant profit margin on that job. It was a commercial job, and they finished it very quickly. And so we could clearly see how God had multiplied our gift. God had multiplied our seed. And out of our act of obedience, God had blessed us. And that wasn't the end of the blessing. This was actually a project where they were doing low-cost housing for seniors in BC. And they had finished the construction process. And so they had a ton of building materials. And at the end of the job, because Doug had found so much favor with them, they said, hey, we have all of these building materials. Do you want them? And they said, you can just have them. So we got over $25,000 of free building materials for our house that we're building. And all we had to do was pay to have it trucked to our home. And so these are the kind of things that I'm talking about when I say, do we trust God with our needs? Do we act in obedience to God and biblical principles? Because when we do, then we also step into the blessings that come through obedience to what God says. And that is just one story out of so many in our life. And in these past 22 years that I've been married to Doug, we've gone on such an incredible journey of trusting God with our finances. And my hope and my prayer is that in this journey that you would find the trust and the faith in God to go on that same journey yourself. And the last question to ask yourself is, do you operate within biblical financial principles? And we're going to go into that a little more in the next few slides here. But like I mentioned just previous to this, when we operate in biblical principles, then the blessings that God promises will come naturally. And so as we discover more of what that looks like and how to implement that into your everyday life, I hope that gives you hope, that gives you encouragement, that this doesn't just depend on you. You don't have to come up with all of these solutions and these strategies on your own. God's laid them out clearly for us in his word. And it's incredibly important that we learn what those are and then start to implement them in our lives. So before we can actually grow and change and move forward, a lot of times we got to get to our lowest place, the place where, we become so desperate that we're willing to do anything to find freedom. And I loved this quote by Charity Bradshaw. She says, "Are you mad enough, broke enough, scared enough, and ultimately motivated enough to change?" And I loved this picture because the little dice there says chance and change. And how many times do we actually, when we think about our finances, when we think about our current financial state. How many times do we just think it happens by chance, right? How many times do we think, well, we'll see where the chips fall, right? But instead of taking more ownership and more responsibility and more control over what we do with our finances and how we implement biblical principles, that is when the change will happen. That is when we will find freedom. That is when we will step into a place of peace in our finances. Because one thing I want to mention is that mine and my husband's finances are not great. They're not perfect. We still have issues. But in all of it, for the most part, we operate from a place of peace. We operate from a place of trust. There are times where we kind of step out of, alignment with the word, or alignment with what we know God has said to us, and we, partner with fear. And it's in those times we feel like things are chaotic. We feel that there's stress. We feel that there's strain. There's conflict. There's all of those things. But when we step back and we come back into alignment with the word of God, we come back into alignment with what he's told us. Those are the moments when we operate from a place of peace. Those are the moments where we can honestly sit in our mess and be 100% okay, knowing that God's going to take care of it. And so instead of you perceiving your situation as just a chance fluke occurrence, it's time to change your mindset and be willing to do the work to change it. So Philippians 4:11-13. Not that I was ever in need, for I have learned how to be content with whatever I have. I know how to live on almost nothing or with everything. I have learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it is with a full stomach or empty, with plenty or little, for I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. This is the Apostle Paul speaking, and I love this scripture because this really narrows it down. If you struggle with overspending, if you struggle with, have emotional spending, or have issues with spending with unhealthy mindsets, this is really going to be a foundational key to you overcoming that. And it's to learn how to be content. Be content with wherever you are in life, whether it is with lots or whether it is with little. To be content means to be satisfied with what you have and not wanting anything else. And it's in this place that you need to get where you do not let your feelings dictate your actions, but you let your contentment and your trust in the Lord and, just being completely satisfied, whether you have little or whether you have much, that, you have that contentment within your spirit, knowing that, it is God who gives you the strength. It is God who provides your need. It is God who will be there for you every step of the way. So what are some biblical financial principles that we can apply to our lives? The first one, which goes along with the scripture that we just read, is living within or below your means. Now, let's just assume that at some point, you guys had a great financial income, you were living a certain lifestyle, but then all of a sudden something happened and either your income decreased significantly or it was just all of a sudden gone. If you continued to live with that lifestyle, then you would be living outside of your means and you would be continually going into deeper and deeper hole financially. And so that's where that scripture of the contentment comes in, right? Because let's say that happens and your income decreases, then your living, the way that you live, the way that you spend your finances also needs to change accordingly to what's coming in. So you need to live within your means. And what's even better is to live below your means, which means to, be needing less than spending less than what you're bringing in, which means you're going to have a surplus every month. Another biblical financial principle is to seek out opportunities to grow your resources. I remember the parable of the servants where the master had left them with all talents, and the one servant was afraid of, you know, making a bad investment, and so he just hid the money. Whereas the other servants went and invested it. They went and put it into something so that it would grow. And when the master came back, he was happy with the ones that invested it and did something with it. And he actually multiplied what he had given them. He gave them increase. But the one that out of fear hid it and buried it and did nothing with it, that is the one where the master said, he is evil and, was cast out of his sight, right? And so when we don't use what God's given us and then seek out opportunities for that to grow and to multiply, then I don't believe that we're being good stewards, right? When we either squander that or we waste it or we hide it or spend it on things that aren't bringing fruit, that's not a biblical way of handling your finances. The third point is to steward what you have well. God has been speaking to me about stewardship a lot over the last few years, and not just in the area of finances, but stewardship of resources, stewardship of time, stewardship of emotional energy. But this comes down to our finances in a very significant way as well. Whatever God has given you in your financial area, you need to steward it well. And God sees everything we do. He sees what we invest in. He sees what we put our time and energy and finances towards. And He's calling us to be good stewards. And when we are good stewards, when we do what is right with those things, He will bless it. He will multiply it. He will allow it to increase. Another biblical principle is tithing, giving God your first fruits of your finances. And this one I'm going to, share personally. We have lived both ways, where we've tithed and when we haven't. We've gone through seasons where we thought, we don't even have enough to tithe. Like, the money coming in isn't even enough to cover our bills. So how could I possibly give an additional 10% away to God? But in those times, we never saw financial freedom. We lived in so much lack. Every month we were going so much farther in debt. And, I believe it was because we were not operating from a biblical principle of tithing. But when God convicted us and we made shifts to that, and we started giving God the first portion of our income, and, we gave that 10%, we still had the same situation. We still didn't have enough to cover what we needed, but God always brought us increase. He always brought us extra things that were unexpected. He always brought extra blessings. And I believe that's because even the scriptures say, when you tithe, God will open the storehouses of heaven over your life, where you will receive so much that you won't be able to contain it. And that's where Doug and I have been experiencing the blessing of God. Like, even with this building of this house, like, we haven't had the money to build it, but God keeps providing resources. He keeps providing materials. He keeps just bringing the stuff that we need at the right time. And God is blessing that effort because we are operating in obedience and because we're tithing. Another area is giving. There's going to be times where God is going to ask you to give a sacrificial gift, just like that story I was telling you about to that business owner last spring. That was a sacrificial gift for us to give that money away at that time. And what we don't always realize is that when we do that, we kind of hope and we expect instant rewards, instant blessings. But when you think of sowing and reaping, even with a seed, when you put that seed in the ground, it doesn't give you instant results. It doesn't give you instant growth and harvest. It takes time. And so when we give and when we sow, it takes time. And that's why even for our gift of $1,000, it took about 8 to 9 months before we saw the fruit of that seed that we planted. But it will increase over time and it will multiply. And so the other thing to keep in mind here is to be obedient to God's promptings. So even when it doesn't make sense, when God prompts you about something, I urge you to be obedient because God blesses obedience. When He prompts your spirit to do something, especially when it's going to cost you, I believe that's where the biggest and the most profound blessings and abundance will take place in your life. Another biblical principle is don't eat your seed. But now, many of us might not understand this concept because, like I said earlier on, many of us live paycheck to paycheck. And in this regard, a seed is often considered like something that you sow or something that you tithe. But how often in life do we think or we withhold because we say, well, no, this is my last, right? But we need to understand that concept of planting that seed and doing it for the purpose of expecting a harvest in when harvest time comes. And I'm reminded of the story of the lady in the Bible. She was that widow, and her son, the prophet of God came and he said, I'm hungry. Do you have something to eat? And the woman was, depressed. She was hopeless. And she said, no, we don't have any food for you. We're going to make our last thing of bread and eat it and die. Because she knew that they had nothing else. They had nothing coming in. And the prophet said, no, if you make me bread first, then you will never go without. And he asked her to get as many jars. And so she did. She obeyed the prophet. She made his bread and she went around and she got all the jars she could find. And he told her to just keep pouring the oil. And as she did that, it just kept pouring. And she filled up every single vessel that she could collect. And she ended up being able to sell that oil and make an incredible profit out of that. And that was what she used to fund the rest of her life. And that was out of obedience. She sacrificially gave her last, and God blessed it abundantly. And so these are biblical principles that if we apply to our financial lives, we're going to see incredible changes. Another area is trust God and ask Him for what you need. Now, this area, I love asking God for what I need because especially when I know I can't supply it on my own. And when I come to that place, I just ask God. I say, God, you know what? I have this need. And I'm going to just use two quick examples. The first one is when Boaz was only a year old and we didn't have much. And that morning before I went to church, I prayed and I said, God, I'm not asking for much, but if you could provide toilet paper and diapers, that would be great. And I went to church and I forgot about it. Well, on our way home, we got a call to go to one of our family members' house. And as we were leaving, all of a sudden, Doug's sister drives up the driveway and points her finger at us and says, in no way, shape, or form is this from God, but it's from me. She opens her trunk and it's toilet paper and diapers, the exact thing that I asked for. And this happens constantly for me. When I need something, I ask God, and then all of a sudden, He brings it to me through such random sources, through such unexpected ways. So trust Him. Ask Him for what you need. Ask Him for what's on your heart. And am certain that you will receive and you will be just floored by the way that he provides for you. James 4 1-3. What is causing quarrels and fights among you? Don't they come from the evil desires at war within you? You want what you don't have, so you scheme and kill to get it. You are jealous of what others have, but you can't get it, so you fight and wage war to take it away from them. Yet you do not have what you want, because you do not ask God for it. And even when you do ask, you don't get it because your motives are all wrong. You want only what will give you pleasure. So I love this scripture because it kind of puts into perspective, number one, what's going on within us. When we look at someone else's life and we wish we had what they have, just that feeling of jealousy and, covetousness, where we're not content. But the one thing that we're neglecting and the one thing that we're not realizing is that it's not the things that we need, the things that we desire, they weren't intended to come from other places. It was always God's intention that we would trust him, that we would rely on him, that we would seek him for these things. And, in the last two sentences, it says, we don't have because we don't ask God for it. And sometimes when we do ask God for it, he won't give it to us because our motives are wrong. And so this is a moment where we can check our hearts. Am I asking God for what I need? Am I trusting him for the deeper issues of my life? And if I am, why am I asking him? Are my motives in the right place? And I think if you can answer those two questions, then you'll be on the path in the right direction. And that's my prayer for you. And this is something that I have personally consistently applied to my life. And just realizing that the things in my life, they aren't for me. They're to bless others. And so even in the little things that, God blesses me with, when he asks me to freely give them, I freely give them. So I've pulled out just a few scriptures from the Bible about what it says about money. So over this next month, as you guys kind of contemplate this and go over some of those more deep questions and, chart out your financial map and your story and try to figure out where you're at and where you need to go. I want you to also search up some of these scriptures and get a biblical perspective of what God says about finances. And this is not an exhaustive list by any, there's so many more, but these are some really good ones that I read consistently. And I would encourage you to take some time, meditate on them, and really let them sink in and get a different perspective on finances, get a different perspective on how to manage finances in your life. One thing to always keep in mind, this scripture, Psalms 23:1, the Lord is my shepherd, I have all that I need. And if we can truly see God for who he is, a loving father, our provider, our shelter, our comfort, anything that you need, he can provide that for you. When you can see him in that light, you can have complete trust. You can have complete security. Even when things don't look good, even when things seem insecure and unstable, you can trust that the Lord will protect you. He will provide for you. He will show you the way. He will give you wisdom and discernment and direction so that you can make wise choices in your life. So how do we change our financial stories? The first step is to be honest with yourself. What is your financial story? Where are you today? Discover what your money mindsets are. Are they covering any wounds or unmet needs in your life? And, when you've kind of mapped out your financial map, pinpoint where things in your life started going off course. Did things go off course because of an event, like one of those events at the beginning that I talked about, some of those unexpected surprise, tumultuous moments, or was it because of an emotion or some kind of, you know, trauma that you had as a child? Can you identify your current triggers that cause you to revert to financially damaging behavior? Sometimes we can be triggered. Today we might have consistently been making some good choices, and then all of a sudden it's like something triggers us and causes us to revert back to a previous behavior. Well, if that's happening, then there's probably some more underlying things that we need to deal with and bring resolution to. Another thing we'll need to do is identify our excuses. And I know we all have them. I have my own. We have excuses why, well, I'll only do that for this month. Next month, I'll make a change. Or, you know, I really need to do this, or my kids really deserve this, or whatever our excuse is for not making positive financial decisions in our life, we need to identify what those are and then work towards eliminating them, getting rid of those. Do a financial reality check. Are you drowning, floating, or surfing? So what that means, drowning would mean, are your expenses higher than the money that's coming in? That would mean that you're drowning. If you're floating, that means you're basically just kind of getting by, you're just, you have the same amount coming in as you have going out. There's no increase and there's no decrease. And surfing means you have a surplus each month. So, do a reality check. Where are you in regards to your finances? And then recognize that you only have control over your next step. You can't control anything else besides that. So what is going to be your next step? And ultimately, you get to choose. Every moment in life, you're faced with a choice. And the Bible describes those choices as life or death, right? How many times in our decision making do we choose a decision that will cause us hardship, that will cause us pain, that will cause us difficulty? But God has given us the opportunity to choose the opposite, to choose life, to choose freedom, to choose hope. So let's do that same thing when it comes to our finances. Let's choose, biblical principles. Let's choose to go in the right direction. So what are some practical ideas of how we can get our finances under control? I recommend doing something called financial fasting. And another way of talking about that would be like delaying gratification. So, for example, let's say you went on a 30-day financial fast where you literally didn't spend a single penny more than you had to. So the only thing you bought was food for your family, gas for your vehicle, and you even limited how much you required of that because you choose not to eat out and you choose not to take extra trips that aren't necessary. You only pay the bills, like your mortgage and your gas bill, and just see how much, money we waste, how much money we just let float away because, we think, well, it's only $2 here, it's only $5 here, but all of that adds up over time. And so, you know, occasionally doing like a financial fast where it's like you literally don't spend anything unless you absolutely have to. That is a great practice of kind of shifting things. Another way of talking about is that a spending detox. So getting rid of anything in your life that is causing you to spend finances in an unhealthy way. So that could be an unhealthy habit. That could be, um, you know, memberships or different things like that that you actually don't use. Taking a serious look at those things and allowing yourself to just get rid of some things that are not useful to you anymore. Another way that you can get control of your finances is sell items that you don't need or use. Especially if you've had the problem where you've purchased things because of emotional reasons, you might find that you are just surrounded by a ton of stuff, a stuff that no longer brings you the joy that you had hoped it would when you bought it. And now it just feels like clutter. It feels like chaos. It feels overwhelming. Well, that's a good sign that you should just let go of it. And if it has value, it would be a great time for you to try to sell those items and then bring some of those finances back into your household. Another thing is to check your monthly subscription and cancel any ones that you don't need or use. I literally just did this morning on my phone because a lot of times, you want to try something out and you say, "Yeah, I'll do the free trial." And then after that, it automatically charges you and you don't realize. A lot of times you just don't realize. And a few of them were even things that my kids had accidentally signed up for. So it's like, you know, sometimes you need to check on these things and just cancel things that you're no longer using or you don't need. Another area you can be practical in is ditch your cable or downgrade your services. And you can do this with everything, even your cell phone bill. You can call up the cell phone companies and say, "Look, are you offering any discounts or any deals right now?" And most of the time they are. And I did that about 6 months ago, and I cut my cell phone bill in half. So the worst thing that could happen is they say, "No, we're not offering any deals." But the best thing that could happen is they say, "Yeah, we have this offer happening right now," and then you save a lot of money that way as well. Another area where you can practically save money is to buy used instead of new. I have been finding some very well, like very good quality products that I've needed, but I've gotten them secondhand and I've gotten them at significantly lower prices than if I were to go buy them full price at a new store. So, be practical, be mindful of what you need and what your budget is to spend on these items. Another area that you might need to focus on is if you have accumulated a ton of stuff over your life, maybe you have a storage unit that is full of stuff. These are things that you haven't looked at for years. Or maybe you have a storage room full of stuff that you've never touched. Maybe it's time to start going through those things and purging and selling things that you don't need and clear those things out. And especially if it's a storage unit that you're paying monthly for, getting rid of that as soon as possible is going to save you that 100 or $150 a month, and you will be so thankful that you've done that because literally that's just draining you, and it's a huge burden of that stuff that you're never going to touch again. Another area where you can save significant is buy your food in bulk and do meal plans. You do When you do that, you can avoid eating out. You can also make multiple, like large portions of different meals and portion them out and freeze them so that you always have meals in the freezer that are easy to pop in the oven, and it will help you resist that urge that when you come home from work you haven't prepared and you're so tired and you're just like, "Well, let's just order in," right? It's going to help you avoid that because you can be like, "Nope, let's just take this casserole out of the freezer. It's going in the oven. We'll have dinner in a half an hour." So those are some really practical ways that you can start saving a significant amount of money and time. Only spend money on your needs and then ask God to provide your desires. Now, what I mean by that is sometimes when I go to the store and I see something and I like it, I actually ask myself this question: do I need this? Like, is this a practical need that I have right now? And if my answer is yes, then I'm like, okay, I will spend the resources that I have to get this item. But if my answer is no, this is just something that I like or that I want, then I don't buy it. I leave it there and then I actually pray about it. And I just say, "God, I really desire that. And this is the reason why I desire that. And, if if that's something that you want to bring to me, provide a way for that. And sometimes God just removes my desire for that item, but other times God actually, you know, allows. So for example, it was my birthday once and I was just like, in my heart I was like, "Oh, I'd really like this." But I didn't buy it for myself. I just trusted it with the Lord, and sure enough, that next week it was my birthday and one of my good friends had bought me the exact thing that I had wanted. And so it's amazing that when we commit those desires of our heart to God, how he can provide those in such amazing ways that we could never imagine on our own. And also say no to something in order to say yes to something better. Sometimes it's just important to say no to yourself, to delay that desire to fulfill that need that you have or that desire that you want something. Just say no, because when you say no to that, you're saying yes to something else, something better. Um, Another practical idea is put a portion of your income away every month to save for emergencies. Like I said at the beginning, sometimes we have emergencies that come in our life we're not prepared for. So to put some of your income away to prepare for those things is a godly principle. Trust God with your finances. Bring your needs before him. He can provide all that you need. Be obedient to God when it comes to sowing, and be generous. And then the last point I wanted to make was don't rescue others who do not have a good history of stewardship, because you will not be sowing into fertile ground and you will not see a harvest. Those kinds of people will often have a spirit of entitlement, and they'll just squander what you give them and they'll always come back looking for more. So really use wisdom and pray about things. If a need comes before you, pray about it. Ask God if he wants you to do anything about that. And if it's a situation like this, he's often going to say no. 2 Corinthians 9:6-8. Remember this: a farmer who plants only a few seeds will get a small crop, but the one who plants generously will get a generous crop. You must each decide in your heart how much to give, and don't give reluctantly or in response to pressure. For God loves a person who gives cheerfully, and God will generously provide all that you need. Then you will always have everything that you need and plenty left over to share with others. So here's our activation. Like I said, over this next month, I want you to sit with all these questions and all the information I provided and just acknowledge where you're at, acknowledge where you've come from, and, make some plans for where you want to go. But for today, for our activation, I want you to define your why. Why is getting your finances under control important to you? So in these next few minutes, Connie, I want you to write down your top 5 reasons why you need to change and how you need to steward your finances. And these reasons will help you motivate you when you're tempted to make poor decisions. And some things to consider is, do you value family? Do you want your relationships to grow? Do you want to get out of debt? Maybe you want to save for a family vacation or go on a missions trip. Or do you have a dream that's been dormant because of no resources that you want to reawaken? And so write down your top 5 reasons why you need to change in the area of stewardship of finances. So just as we wrap up here today, 3 keys for you to remember is: number 1, recognize that the mindsets you have towards finances. Sorry, I read that wrong. Number 1, recognizing the mindsets that you have towards finances will be the first step in making new choices that lead to freedom. Number 2, if you want to walk in abundance and provision, then you'll need to align yourself with biblical principles. And number 3, remember that God only calls us to steward what we're given well. And we are to trust him with the rest and see him provide miraculously in every area of our life. And I believe that in the area of finances, it's the only place in the Bible that God said, put me to the test and see that I will not fulfill what he said. And he said that in Malachi. So, this is an area where God, is challenging us to take him at his word. Test test the word, see that it is true. And Proverbs 21:5 says, "Good planning and hard work leads to prosperity, but hasty shortcuts lead to poverty." And so as you go into this next month and you start pondering some of these things, I also want to just mention that when you go into a season of correcting financial mistakes, it will require endurance, delaying gratification, and pushing through difficult times. But I can tell you from experience, it will be worth it. What you receive on the other side of, breaking through some of these mindsets, overcoming some of these root issues will be freedom, will be, good decision making, and also when you align yourself with biblical principles, you're going to see the blessings that come with that. So next month, Connie and I will be sharing on how to improve your marriage. And in this past year, Connie and I have both been on a great but difficult journey of learning, just what God calls us to and how we're supposed to care for our spouses. And so we're going to be sharing personally from our own journeys and what we've learned and how we can actually, you know, make some significant shifts that will make our marriages start to thrive instead of struggle. And so, if that's something that is of interest to you, we encourage you to join us next month. And if you know anyone who maybe would benefit from hearing this topic, you can also invite them to join us as well.